provided.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Bustamante, a second from Commissioner Green. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, next we'll go on to item number 2, presentation and discussion of the FY 2024 budget development. This looks like it is County Manager's Office, Schaefer, and Department Directors. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And is my volume okay? Can you hear me all right? Okay. If
I can hear you.
if for some reason I get too far away, please just let me know. So we're going to begin by providing a high-level overview concerning the development of the budget to date. That's a PowerPoint presentation that will be led by myself and Finance Division Director Yvonne Herrera. We'll then use that as a springboard to discuss specific budget request as refined for the divisions that comprise the County Manager's Office, the Growth Management Department, our Public Works Department, and our Community Development Department. So I'll start with an overview of how it is that we've developed the budget to date. We didn't give much in the way of specific constraints to our departments and elected officials as they put in their initial operating budget request. The goal was to provide the Board of County Commissioners with a more complete view of what the perceived needs were in the departments and in our elected offices. Once that initial budget submission or those initial budget submissions came in, we did have budget hearings with all of our elected officials as well as with our departments. Moving forward in time, as the board knows, we contracted with a third-party economist to provide us with multi-year revenue projections in the large areas of gross receipts tax, property tax, and lodger's tax. That helped define what our recurring revenue picture looks like, both for the next fiscal year, but also the following fiscal year, and also identifies potential downside revenue risk to the county stemming from the projected recession. We, in the County Manager's Office, further focused on making recurring investment in the county workforce. In particular, a 6% COLA effective July 1st, 2023 for almost the entire county, with an equivalent amount set aside for negotiations for our deputy sheriff's union. And then we also worked with our departments since the last time we presented budget material to the board to try and identify how we might free up additional recurring revenue so that we could revisit our compensation and classification system systematically at mid-year of this fiscal year, which I'll get to in a second. In light of those macro goals, the request that we gave to the departments were to refine their budget request in certain respects. And that included to try and identify those requests that are in their operating budget that are recurring versus non-recurring. That has not been something that departments have historically been asked to do, but this was consistent with the goal, budgetary goal of the board to meet recurring expenditure needs to the maximum extent possible with recurring revenue. It also gives us a better sense of what we would be able to support on a recurring basis in terms of expenditures, primarily in the area of employee salaries and benefits. We also asked departments to scrutinize what their actual budget requests were to determine if there may be built in to their budget request some amounts that may not tie to actual expenditure history or may have been utilized in order to capture some potential years. In other words, did they include amounts that in effect were a contingency for outlier years? So I'll give you an example of that. If you look at our contractual or our attorney services line item in our budget over a course of years, the requested budget has been for several years about $300,000. Our actual spend has varied over that time, and I think it averages out to about $180,000. And there was one year, and I might be off in certain respects, but there was one year where it was closer to 280. The point is, we're budgeting so that we have some amount of additional budget authority needed or available if needed for attorney services, but we also have separately a specific budget contingency that also includes $500,000 for that same eventuality. And so the idea was, as we put together our operating budget, that we were going to try and identify those areas in which we may have included funds that might be necessary for an outlier year, but the result is we were tying up recurring resources to meet what might not be a recurring need, and we could address that through our contingency funds and other means. We also asked our departments to prioritize their request in light of our paramount goal of continuing to invest in our existing resources and our existing positions. And so we asked departments to look at what their FTE and recurring requests were in light of, again, that paramount goal. I want to talk a little bit about what a non-recurring expenditure is, because it does impact the budget that we're trying to build. A non-recurring expense in our accounting manual is defined as costs that support one-time efforts or services and programs that can reasonably be terminated at the end of the fiscal year. So this doesn't mean that there might not be a category of expense that a department might ask to fund in multiple years if the money is available to them. What it means is that it's an expense that we could cut off reasonably at the end of the fiscal year without impacting core services and without, again, impacting our primary mission in terms of what we're trying to deliver to the public. The reason we went through that effort is because we wanted to be able to support continuing ongoing investments in our workforce. And what I projected here in the PowerPoint was just to give you a bit of overview of what the county, and Reed, the Board of County Commissioners, has done in this area over the last year. At July 2022, there was a 3% COLA that went into effect. In November of 2022, the compensation and classification system was implemented for non-union employees. In January of 2023, the compensation and classification system for AFSCME 1782 bargaining unit members was implemented. In January of 2023, 1.5% COLA went into effect. As you all know, we're recommending that we provide a 6% COLA for all county employees effective July 2023, with an equivalent amount being set aside for the deputy sheriff's negotiations with a targeted effective date under the current CBA of January 1, 2024. as the board knows, such an investment not only benefits our existing team members in terms of providing immediate salary increases, but it has the effect of moving our entire pay scale as well as the steps that are within them by the same amount. So the point is, for non-union and ASME 1782, as well as for the RECC, ASME 1413, our corrections department, 1413M, our nurses, and our firefighters union, that the result is the pay scale shifts. And so again, it moves everything on a prospective basis, that type of recurring investment. Now, looking forward, and in particular focusing on the compensation and classification plan that the board adopted last fall and again and in January. At the time that the plan was put together, anytime you do a market study, it's a snapshot in time. So you're pulling data at a particular point in time, and that's the basis for the ranges that were suggested. The data that was used for the compensation and classification report was from spring of 2022. Obviously, a lot has happened since that time, and anytime you're trying to keep your compensation and classification system current, you're going to have to regularly go to market to make sure that you're aware of where things currently stand for your positions. At the time that the board adopted the plan, we committed to doing that a minimum of every 2 years, with the first such refresh occurring this fall and winter, when we're going to, again, ask our contractor to reevaluate where things stand in light of current market conditions. That is the basis for the recommendation on this slide, which is, while we've endeavored to try and free up a fair amount of recurring revenue, we respectfully suggest and request that the board not budget about $4 million of that out of the gate for new initiatives and for new recurring expenses, but that those funds be held so that once we do the comp and class refresh, the board would be in a position at mid-fiscal year to make the necessary investment to continue to invest in our current workforce. That directly ties to the strategic plan adopted by the board, one of the primary strategies and objectives of which was recruitment and retention, with one of the specific strategies being to have a competitive market-based pay system. And so again, what we're trying to do is build a recurring budget that is sustainable and that allows us to anticipate and plan for those investments that we think we may have to meet or have to make, so as to meet that paramount goal of recruitment and retention. And then finally, as we continue to work with and through our comp and class system, we may well identify positions where we have to change our strategy from being match the market to a market leader position in those positions that continue to have chronic material vacancies, notwithstanding our past and ongoing investments in recruitment efforts. So as we went through, to summarize at this point, and we looked at various FTE requests and recurring budget requests, we were trying to strike that balance between meeting needs and looking at new initiatives, while also ensuring that we were preserving enough recurring revenue so that we could meet the paramount goal of being able to continue to invest in our existing positions and our existing workforce. For each of the departments and elected offices, you will be provided with the following documents, and this details what those are. The first, and where we're going to focus most of our time, is a fiscal year 2024 operating budget summary. It starts with the operating budget for fiscal year 2023, and then it details requests and recommendations by the county manager's office that are generally organized by reductions, things that dropped out of the budget from one year to the next, what we'll call small beer or inflation and minor increases that we didn't separately identify but rolled up into a specific figure. We also wanted to isolate what increases were attributable to the class and comp system, as well as the implementation of CBA negotiated increases or collective bargaining agreements. And then finally, we wanted to identify those requests that were recurring versus non-recurring for the reasons I've already mentioned. And then we highlight those reductions that we identified with working with our departments in terms of areas in which the budgeted request could be reduced. The next document that is provided to the board is the detailed budget request broken down by cost center. So we're generally trying to present information to the board at a level at which it's useful to have discussions. Ultimately, everything gets into a cost center and is very much more detailed than the summary information that is being provided. What I would note is that gives you some historic information in terms of what the actual expenditures were from 21 and 22, as well as what the fiscal year 23 budget requests were and the activity to date. And it also shows the fiscal year 24 initial budget request. So again, that is as submitted before we tried to identify any areas in which it could be reduced. And that was primarily a document control matter so that we didn't have multiple versions of the same inputs floating around. The next two documents reflect fixed asset request and FTE request that came into the budget system. Those are separately captured as departments submit those requests, and so that contains both the request as well as the county manager's office recommendations. Again, the goal of these budget study sessions are to present to the board what our recommendations are, how we got to where we're at, and for the board to ask any questions, either of myself, Yvonne, or the department directors. We're not asking for any direction from the board during these meetings. It's to provide you with information and recommendations. And as you know, we've built in a fair amount of time between the study sessions and the actual action meetings at which we can start with the board to make those final decisions as to what will go into the interim budget. All of the information that we're presenting is subject to change, but we wanted to provide you at least with an initial summary of what our efforts to identify reductions as well as alternative funding sources and our efforts to try and disaggregate recurring versus non-recurring have identified. And so this is just, again, a summary page. It is subject to change as we do some final QC and we refine things based upon our ongoing conversations with the departments. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any initial questions, and otherwise we'll proceed to start to go through the budget request of the specific departments who are on the agenda for today.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the county manager's office team to either come up to the front pews or perhaps if you want to pull up chairs to sit at the table so that any questions can be answered as we go forward. Okay. So this is the summary sheet where we're going to focus most of our time. In terms of significant reductions from the fiscal year 2023 recurring operating budget, those included the low-income property tax rebate. And as most of you know who've been through several budget cycles, the board has adopted by ordinance a low-income property tax rebate. And the way that works is that folks who qualify for the rebate, and it's a refundable rebate or credit, are allowed to claim that on their income tax return. So if you qualify for the credit, as you fill out your state income tax return, you're able, for those counties who have adopted it, you're able to claim that amount. What happens is that the Taxation and Revenue Department then sums up the total amount of credits that they paid for county residents, and then they bill the county for that amount. So again, you claim it on your income tax, the state pays it, the state turns around and bills the county to get reimbursed for the amounts that were paid to county residents. The actual mechanisms of that property tax rebate are set forth in state law. They have not been amended, I believe, since we've implemented them. And so, in other words, the income thresholds haven't changed. So nor has the amount of the credit or rebate, and forgive me, I'm using both terms, although they are in fact separate tax ideas because I forget which one the statute utilizes. But in any event, because the amounts of the rebate haven't changed, nor have the income levels changed, over time the amount that gets paid out is just being reduced because incomes are rising, and again, the qualifications aren't changing. So this reflects a reduction of what we anticipate actually having to pay the state for that low-income property tax rebate. In addition, our finance division has reduced the amount that was requested in temporary services. The idea in part being that if temporary services are needed, and you'll see this in several different budget presentations, that you would use vacancy savings to fund that. In other words, if I don't have the full-time FTE to perform the work, well, that means that I have their salaries that I can use to pay temps. And if you budget for it, both in the contractual services as well as in your personnel services and employee benefits, you're in effect double budgeting for the same idea. And so this was a way, again, for us to really try and tighten up our budgeting practices a bit so that we're not including within the budget request resources that we don't need in order to deliver services to the county. Moving forward, we had approximately $55,000 of inflation and minor increases, and the cost to implement the class and comp as well as CPA increases totaled over $800,000 in terms of that investment in our workforce. In terms of recurring request, many of those relate to various softwares that we use, as well as IT's efforts to both cascade monitors, phones, purchase docking stations as we move to more laptop-based computers, as well as increased request for county-issued telephones, IPRA software, and other items. The one thing that I would highlight in terms of a specific recurring request, there are two. First of all, there is a large item that is captured here for insurances. That all doesn't get paid out of the county manager's office. It ultimately gets pushed out into the department budgets. It's captured here so that we're capturing that at some level, but we haven't gotten to the point of the budget development that that's going to be put out into the individual departments or agencies. The IT security professional, we are making a move to actually outsource our IT security services. We found it to be a consistent struggle to try and fill our IT security positions, because as a one-off organization, to compete at the salaries necessary to pay for those professionals was just proving to be exceptionally challenging. And so we feel as if that need can better be met through contracted services. Moving down, you'll see that there were a variety of efforts that were undertaken to, again, reduce the operating budget request of the county manager's office, which again includes legal, HR, as well as IT and finance. Those are all detailed here. I talked a bit about contractual services and attorney's fees. And again, to the extent that we included monies in the budget that were necessary to meet sort of outlier years, the idea here is that we would cover those potential needs through contingency funds if needed. The non-recurring requests are not insignificant. They include both an amount of money for Cindy McKee and her team to contract with outside consultants to help analyze different parts of the county to see how we might be able to improve the services that we offer and our processes and procedures. It would work somewhat like our internal audit function, but more of an operational focus. And that's the basis for that request, is that you could pick a department, whether it was HR or IT, growth management, and say, we're going to contract with a subject matter expert to look at what we do to see how we can improve on the services that we provide. It's something that we're doing already in certain areas. RECC is going through a similar outside review. We've contracted with a consultant to help make recommendations for our Office of Emergency Management. So what this does is just provide an amount of resources that could be used on a more systemic basis throughout the county. We score it as non-recurring for the reasons I mentioned, is that if we had to cut $250,000 from our budget, this is where we would go before we started to look at furloughs or anything related to employee benefits and salaries or our core mission. Our non-recurring requests include $50,000 for a contract lobbyist, recruitment efforts to centralize those in HR's budget rather than having individual departments request them, and a variety, again, of other requests. One initial thing that was included in the budget was potential contract services to contract with someone to run audio-visual for chamber meetings. In the event, we felt as if we could utilize our existing resources to continue to meet that need, and it didn't rise to the level that we wanted to, again, tie up resources even on a non-recurring basis. I would highlight that the Microsoft 365 pilot is a bit more than a pilot. It includes some cost to lay the groundwork for the county to migrate to Office 365 in a future fiscal year if the decision is made to do so. But it is scored as non-recurring here because it is both to evaluate whether Office 365 is well suited for the county needs, but also, again, to do some of the groundwork to make a prompt cutover if in fact that should come to pass. In terms of FTEs and reclassifications, I will detail those in a moment. The requests are on the FTE summary sheet, and they include an effort to reclassify a position from a System Administrator 2 to a System Administrator 3. All of these are recommended by the County Manager's Office. That reflects that I believe we have a team member who has achieved the necessary certifications in order to advance to that higher level of system admin position, if I'm not mistaken. With regard to the 2 security administrator positions, recall that we're outsourcing that function, and so the recommendation is that we reclassify those positions in order to meet 2 needs that were identified from our listening meetings with county departments as to how we could provide a higher level of service. One is to have an IT project manager, which we currently do not have. And I think we've all identified that as an area of need for the various software and other IT projects that the county undertakes, is that an IT project manager would be very much a value add position. The third is to reclassify an IT security administrator position to a desktop support specialist 3. This is an effort to better serve our departments. And one of the requests for additional services that came out of our listening meetings was to have more staff in the departments supporting their software, supporting their hardware, and providing a higher level of service. And so that's the basis for using that position to try and provide augmented services in that area. In addition, there was a request to reclassify an administrative assistant position to a department administrator. That's meant to provide IT with additional support to better manage its contracts, as well as the increased level of purchasing that IT is doing on behalf of departments, as well as to manage our various cascade programs. And then finally, in the county attorney's office, there was a desire to create a records program manager. And right now, our records management system or program is housed in the legal department. And rather than using legal services to meet that need, the idea was to actually hire a records program manager to manage that program as we seek to reduce both the volume of physical records that we maintain, as well as our reliance on an outside vendor to house those records. Initially, the legal department requested an additional FTE, working with Jeff and trying to, again, balance the need to target resources while also preserving funds to invest in our existing resources. I think we agreed that an approach that would work is to reclass an existing vacant paralegal position to that county records program manager. And again, that reflects the cooperation that we've received from departments in trying to meet their growing needs, while also balancing the need to continue to be able to invest in our current workforce. There's not a whole lot to highlight on the FTE capital plan fixed asset summary. For the most part, the request seemed to be well considered. The 2 that I would call out is that the paging and intercom system that would be utilized in the event of emergency situations, we went ahead and purchased this year using contingency funds so that could be more quickly deployed so that we're better able to manage those situations. And what that is it allows almost public service type messages to be broadcast over folks' desktop phone, so that if there was an event that required them to shelter in place, for example, in their offices, that message would be broadcast out. And we think it's a significant improvement to our existing systems. And then the request for a asset tagging system, which would help keep track of equipment and such that are given to folks. And talking to IT, we feel as if that need could be met through alternative means. So that's it for the county manager's office budget, and I'll stop there, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have about the initial request, our proposed reductions, or how we endeavored to score different aspects of our budget.
Any questions? Okay,
I have a question, Madam Chair.
okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was looking at the reductions and they all look reasonable, but I don't know what the starting amount was. For example, it certainly makes sense that we would lower the amount for commission postage because we hardly ever send letters through snail mail anymore, but I don't know. Is there another chart somewhere that shows us what the totals are? I mean, what the starting amount was? Are we reducing it to zero, or are we starting with a fairly large amount and just reducing it a little bit? It was hard to tell.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Hughes. And we did not extrapolate that information for purposes of this presentation. We can as we move forward. The details are included in the detailed budget request, which would be a place to look at, but we did not have the opportunity to pull that over into the summary sheet, but we can do that after we wrap this meeting.
Okay, I figured it was somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, hearing no other questions, would you please take down your hand? Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. We can move on.
So thank you, Madam Chair. Next, we're going to move on to the Public Works Department, and I'd ask Ryan to come up to the podium, and whoever from his team that he'd like to sit up here as well. So again, we start with a fiscal year 2023 recurring operating budget request of almost $27 million. As submitted, Public Works budget included a variety of reductions. I would focus, and this is very much in the details, but on the road striping, we stripe county roads that are paved every 2 years. And so we just completed a complete restriping, my understanding, in the current fiscal year. So we won't be due to do another round of recycling, or excuse me, another round of striping. The next cycle would be in fiscal year 2025. In order to smooth out wide variations in the budget request, we're going to budget half of what they need every 2 years, so that we're getting them the resources they need. But you're not seeing, $500,000 or close to it swings in their operating budget. As you move down through, again, these were things that were budgeted for in fiscal year 2023, but the department did not believe that was needed in 2024, or reflects changes in terms of our commitments, for example, under the BDD contribution reduction. Moving on and highlighting the salary and wage changes unrelated to FTE request. There was a significant amount of funding that went to the Public Works Department to implement the class and comp, as well as the negotiated collective bargaining agreement. The Public Works Department had also frozen some positions in fiscal year 2023 in an effort to try and fund some increases. all of those positions were unfrozen as part of this budget cycle. And so that's where that change came from. We're not proposing a lot of reorganization type moves this year. One that we are recommending and is reflected both in the budget of the Public Works Department as well as in the Community Services Department is that we believe that there would be a lot of efficiencies gained if community centers, parks, the rodeo grounds, the county fair, and our satellite operations, if those were moved from the Community Services Division to Public Works. Now, both departments are responsible for various aspects of those functions, and I think both departments agree that they would be well served if the functions were consolidated in Public Works, which would have the additional benefit of freeing community services up to focus on their core mission in terms of providing services to seniors and otherwise. But that's, again, showed here, but you'll also see a corresponding reduction in the Community Services Department budget.
Manager Schaefer.
Yes.
So with that, will there be a new position created to serve the constituents? Because I know that from my own experience with Nancy Rodriguez Community Center, that is heavily used, that they have a constant need to rent out that building, so how will that be? And what department in Public Works will oversee that? Because I don't want to see things falling through the cracks, and you don't want us as commissioners being called and told, oh, I can't rent such and such place because I can't get a hold of anybody, etc. So that's, one of my concerns.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. And the answer to any such calls is to give them Brian's cell phone number. But where it would be housed is not in a new division, but it would go well with our facilities division. And so an FTE is coming with that request. And so we believe that we'll be able to implement that without missing a beat. But no, the intent was not to stand up a specific division within CSD, but to include it within the facilities division. Moving on, we did identify working with the department, and we appreciate, again, the department's support across the board to help us meet the paramount goal of trying to continue to invest in our workforce. A variety of reductions that we believe that could be made without negatively impacting Public Works operations. And again, to the extent that we miss the mark a bit, which we don't anticipate that we will do, the county does budget annually contingency funds to help backstop in that situation. So again, I think we're building a responsible budget that more accurately reflects what our anticipated needs are. We did note in terms of other funding sources that we believe that lodgers tax can help carry some of the load for open space and trails, and that in some of our road infrastructure maintenance, that the first increment of the hold harmless gross receipts tax could help cover that. Again, freeing up resources that could be used in other areas, primarily salary and benefits.
So, Manager Schaefer, with open space, will they be getting a ranger or another FTE?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The ranger is actually part of the Growth Management Department budget. This is really reflective more of maintenance of our open space properties. The ranger and interpretive ranger is on the growth management side. We still continue to have a bifurcation of responsibility as it relates to open space between growth management and our Public Works Department.
Thank you.
So moving forward, there were several items that were scored as non-recurring. I would note that the most significant aspect of that probably is more accurately scored as using alternative revenue sources, and that's in the area of road maintenance materials. And Brian can speak to this better than I, but in short, the Roads Department moved to a new system of evaluating our paved roads, which is an IMS evaluation system. I believe it uses LiDAR in order to better gauge what the actual condition of our roads are. Using that evaluation process, the Public Works Department has identified a need to increase the amount of routine annual maintenance that is done on our roads to maintain them at their current service level. And so, as I said, it's a misnomer in part to call it non-recurring, but in reality, we believe that at least in the midterm, meaning multiple fiscal years, that need can be met using non-recurring resources as we build up to the point that becomes something that needs to be addressed using recurring resources. And in particular, the Road Maintenance Fund has a not insignificant fund balance that can be used to meet that need, as well as the first increment of the hold harmless gross receipts tax. So again, I wanted to call that out, that's more accurately scored as being a need that can be met through alternative funding sources. So moving forward to the FTE request for the Public Works Department, there were two requests that were put forward. One is to create another custodian position. This reflects some catch-up work as we continue to expand the square footage of our facilities. We haven't kept pace in investing in our custodial staff, and so this is an effort to allow them to be responsible for less square footage and increase, again, the level of service that is provided countywide. And I believe with a particular emphasis, though, on the First Judicial District Court space, if I'm not mistaken. The Utilities Department did request a utilities construction inspector. Brian and I talked about this, and we believe in the current fiscal year, we would try to meet that need through contractual services. And so this is someone who's actually going to be inspecting utility lines or wastewater lines. And Brian, if I'm getting wrong, correct me, but primarily for new development. So the utility line extension agreements that the board approves, someone else builds it, it's then dedicated to the county. This would primarily be an inspector who would go out and confirm that the work was done in accordance with specifications. And the proposal is to utilize budgeted cash or fund balance to meet that on a contractual basis for two reasons. Number one, anticipated utility revenue that's being projected is less than what was projected last year, number one. And number two, I think Brian has identified the paramount need of needing to invest in our utility system operators in order to retain existing staff and start to chip away at the high vacancy levels that are there. So again, it's partially a prioritization of system operators over this position. It's partially also reflective of the fact that this need could be met through contractual services. And then looking forward, the utilities department is just about to undertake a new rate study, so that we would be looking to come to the board during the current fiscal year to recommend new rates for our water and wastewater customers. And the need for this position could be built into that rate study, so that we're starting to get recurring revenue to support it on a go-forward basis. Did I get that all right, Brian?
Yes.
So on the fixed asset,
Excuse me, I'm
go ahead.
sorry. Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner
is
Bustamante.
it possible to make this screen just a little larger?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And-
Thank you very much.
And I also believe that everything that we are showing today has been provided to you in hard copy as well. And I will, at the same time, make this larger if I can.
It's good now, thank you.
Okay.
The last one was just itty bitty.
Okay. Okay, hopefully that helps. Thank you so much. The FTE request, the fixed asset request for Public Works are detailed in the packet material that was provided to you as well. I believe for the most part, other than things that were deferred voluntarily through the VERB process and by Public Works, those being vehicles, we recommend the fixed asset request that were put forward by the department. In particular, I think I wanted to highlight a laudable effort by Public Works to try and leverage equipment to be able to do more without taxing our human resources. And request number 4533 are rollers that can be attached to our heavy equipment so that we don't have to have two pieces of equipment and two heavy equipment operators conducting, I believe it's road maintenance and road construction activities as well. And so, that's another effort to try and use equipment to be more efficient in what we do. So, Brian, is there anything that you want to highlight or discuss before we stand for questions?
I think you covered everything pretty well, Greg. I appreciate the pneumatic roller. That came from a staff suggestion on looking for efficiency. So definitely kudos go out to staff as we have conversations on how we can work more efficiently with the limited staff we have. I'm very appreciative of staff bringing ideas like that forward. So that's all I have.
Are there any questions from the board? Commissioner?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm calling on you.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see you. So I see Greg and Brian, though, so it's nice to see them. And I hope to be back there in person on Friday, wearing a mask, but, be much nicer to be there. I just have a question about the budget for staff salaries. Was any thought given so far as to how much it would cost to bring some of the positions we're having trouble filling up to more like market leader positions? The biggest complaint I get, especially in this past year, has been about how long it takes to fix the roads. And as you know, there's a lot of roads that are county roads in my district. And so I get a lot of calls. And I'm just wondering, every time we meet Public Works, which I love everybody who works there and you all do a good job, but there's too few people. It seems like we're always at 50% capacity on our road crews. And I just wonder if, if that's something we could think about or has been thought about.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hughes, I guess the short answer is yes and yes. We have thought about it. and we can think about it. And that type of change in philosophy is included in the figure that we're recommending we not budget as we look forward to the next fiscal year, to give us the flexibility to make exactly those type of changes. Once we see what, if any, impact the 6% increase will have on our ability to recruit.
Yeah, do we have an idea what it would cost just to do public works? I do understand we want to have some flexibility at mid-year. I guess my thought is public works might need help, before then. And I'm just wondering what that cost would be just to do, for example, the road crews or some of the other parts of public works that are way understaffed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. And to be clear, the funds that would be set aside, it would primarily be utilized for a systematic review at mid-year, but it certainly could be utilized before then in order to address these chronic areas. Just in terms of the timing, I don't have a specific number today as to what that might look like, but we are actively working with Public Works to identify what we think might be necessary.
Okay, yeah, maybe if you and Brian do come up with a number, I'd be very interested to know what it is, sooner rather than later, just so we sort of know what we're looking at. If that's going to take up the whole 4 million, that's one thing. If it's not very much of it, that's a different way of looking at it, in terms of doing it earlier rather than later, because we don't want to use up all our flexibility on one department. The only other thing I wanted to say is I really like the idea of having the $1.9 million maintenance plan to keep all of our paved roads in good shape. There's a lot of potholes on my way to work right now, and I know the crews are out fixing them up, so I know there's a lot of work to be done. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Brian, for preparing this. Question about capacity to go after federal and state funds and to capitalize on that, whether it's grant writing, whether it's identifying and compressing the CIP budget and expediting what is a 20-year plan into the current ability to fund things, but maybe not the capacity to actually get it done or to source the money. So is there strategy in here in staffing to expedite these aspects? I see a lobbyist, which is great, so we can go to the legislature and get the money that's in this county manager's office. I wonder if there's other folks, whether it's in growth management, it's a sort of across the board area, and I'm wondering where that meets public works in facilities and for infrastructure. Just knowing that infrastructure for broadband, is there anything specific for broadband planning? Does that fall under public works? Is there anything for roads and infrastructure and so on, and how to make sure that we can go after this generational, once a generation funding from federal and state sources to capture that money, because there's a lot of it out there and it's not going to last forever.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner Green. Relative to pursuing the funds, Leandro is working with the Executive Director of the North Central Economic Development District to make sure that we're tied in with their grant writing functions. In terms of increasing our capacity on a short-term or per project basis, if you recall from our previous budget presentation, we are suggesting that the board set aside significant funds to do just that, as well as to potentially provide matching funds if needed. I believe the request was about $10 million, and so that would be a means to fund temporary surge capacity wherever it might be needed, whether it's in public works with project managers, procurement in terms of procurement specialist or otherwise. So that's how we had endeavored to build the budget in a way that would be flexible but would meet that need.
And so $10 million would be somewhat flexible to be project managers or matches if there's a match. So on an 80-20 match, $10 million could effectively get close to $50 million is sort of like an idea of the scope of that for this year?
That would be correct. And then there would potentially, and Yvonne can speak to this, other sources of potential funds if that proves to be inadequate in terms of capital outlay, gross receipts tax, as well as hold harmless gross receipts tax for matching funds. And I don't know if you want to say anything to that, Yvonne, but that's a specific placeholder amount that could be used for all of those purposes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Bustamante.
Madam Chair, Manager Schaefer, and Brian, I have a question. I assume that it would be within planning. We have a few communities who've asked me, and I'll just say specifically Galisteo and La Cienega, the conversation again, and I'll sound like a broken record until I understand better of what we need to do to get to their concerns with regard to traffic control. Both communities have very different perspectives of what would actually calm traffic in their areas. And one thing that has been discussed is having an engineered, informed community plan for that kind of work. If there was an engineered, informed, for example, in a very recent meeting with the community of Galisteo, they want speed bumps. They want them tomorrow. They wanted them yesterday. They want speed bumps. Whereas the community of La Cienega was discussing, well, what would it take for us to have some roundabouts? Speed bumps aren't good. And honestly, I just hold my hands up and I say, well, I'm not an engineer and I don't know what's appropriate. But if we're going to work with these communities to get some traffic calming in their area, would that come out of this budget, or would that be something that they could work on within their planning? Specifically, La Cienega has just kicked off their planning work, and I thought, well, why couldn't they do that within that scope of work, and it would be working with the planning department instead? But I just want some clarification on how, who, and where would they be able to get an engineered, informed project, or to at least have some information, better information for the types of requests that they make.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Bustamante, we have, for La Cienega, there is a, can't remember the exact title, but it's a traffic control safety plan appropriation from the state. Don't quote me on this, it's somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $150,000 that we've gotten that we need to put into to play. So that would involve a solicitation of an engineer and public meetings, community meetings, and those kinds of things. So that definitely is on our radar. We do not have any funding at this time for Galisteo. The results of that plan would then need to be, I would see a deliverable of that plan would be either a mini capital improvement plan to identify needs in those areas and prioritize those needs, not come in and just put traffic circles and traffic speed humps all throughout the community without looking at the impact of that. So I would see it to be a phased program, probably over time, and then that would tie directly into our ICIP and our CIP. When you're talking about speed humps, those are things that we could potentially do in-house. Traffic circles require land acquisition and those types of things, which may be a little bit larger of a process, but some things that could be a result of the traffic study and safety study could be implemented pretty quickly. Other things would, capital wise would take a little bit longer, and land acquisition wise might take a little while longer. So, but definitely that's something in the works that we're looking at for the La Cienega area.
Madam Chair and Brian, thank you very much. I think it will also, I do understand that there are some jurisdictional differences in the Galisteo area. They've been working with the Department of Transportation now, from what I understand, exceeding 10 years, the concerns. They told very colorful stories about standing out with hair dryers to slow people down. And I think that the opportunity to give them some understanding that their concerns are being heard, and we won't yet, again, make the recommendation that flashing, you're going over the speed limit signs, but yes, the county will be moving towards that direction and working either with New Mexico DOT or however, or whatever it would take for them to understand that we do understand that there is a speeding issue through the village. It's literally right through the village, which creates some other health and safety concerns. So if that's not within this budget or whatever we can do to get there from here, I would want to see that that's part of a plan for them to understand better, especially when it comes to things like speed bumps. And when someone said out loud, speed bumps can be a detriment to emergency vehicles. If we have some type of engineered informed information for them so that they have some understanding of that there is someone listening to their problem. I appreciate that, and that there would be a plan with the county to address that problem, not just listen to it.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bustamante, that's understood. I was not aware of the DOT working with Galisteo for 10 plus years, but that's interesting. We do have, you've seen the driver feedback signs. We have two now. Well, we have one that's operational. The other one was 3G based, and that we just sent back the computer to get that updated. As you can see in the fixed assets, we're asking for 2 additional driver feedback signs. These driver feedback signs, technology's improved, like it does every day. And the nice thing about these traffic feedback signs that we've put in the fixed assets, not only do they remind the driver of the speed limit and how they're performing based on that speed limit, but they also collect data for number of cars passing in an area, the speed that and they collect that data, and then we can download it. Whereas the older technology that we have doesn't necessarily have that technology. So that's one thing that we're planning for in this budget. The other thing we have right now in stock that has not been rolled out yet, but we're planning on rolling out in the La Cienega area along Los Pinos. Couple, I think along Los Pinos, definitely, maybe another area as well, but permanently mounted driver feedback signs. So on poles, and they flash the speed limit just in areas that we have reported racing, those types of things. Understanding that it's not foolproof, but it also is working with the sheriff's office for patrols, and we are doing those things as well as looking at traffic safety studies in those areas. So it's a multi-pronged approach that we're taking in La Cienega that we'll also have to employ in Galisteo as well.
Madam Chair, Brian, I do want to make sure that I also state that they asked for cameras in Galisteo. Just saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bustamante, Commissioner Hamilton, Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While we're at it, we've had some requests up in the Nambe area for State Road 503, or sorry, County Road 503, and I know Deputy County Manager Leandro Cordova probably won't like that, but he commutes that every day. But that's. Yeah, well, we'll appreciate that. You'll have an excuse. So thank you for traffic calming on your own behalf for all of us. And, having those tools, even if they're sporadic, right, if they're temporary, 3 months of having something up there can sort of create behaviors that might slow people down. So if there's a few of these tools that can be installed and then moved, when they become permanent, they almost become... people know where the sign is, but if the thing gets picked up and moved, a quarter mile down the road around a different corner, people might never be sure where the cop is, where the deputy is. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. So I want to go to the fixed asset summary of the vehicles. So I don't see on this vehicle list any place where we are putting in charging stations. And I think, I don't mean to be a broken record, but I think you have heard this from me for the last 6 years. I want charging stations so that we can have an electric fleet And I recognize that those two go together, that if we first have to have the charging stations, otherwise we can't have the electric fleet. So
Thank you,
I
Madam
would
Chair.
like to
and,
see that on this.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, that would actually be a capital item. It wouldn't be a fixed asset.
Okay.
So that's why it's not present here.
Okay, so if it's a capital item, good. But then I see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vehicles that we're going to replace. Are those, I want to make sure they're at least hybrid, or if, in some cases, we do have charging stations in certain places. We have charging stations here at the county manager's office. We have 101 or 100 Catron. I don't know if we have any at Public Works. I hope we have some at Public Works. But
Madam
yeah.
Chair, we have 2 charging stations at Public Works.
Okay, so where these cars are located, open space and trails, possibly they are located at Public Works. Anyhow, I'm just bringing that up, and I'll continue to bring it up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Brian, do you want to discuss the feasibility of electric vehicles for the ones that are on the Public Works list?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, these vehicles, the replacement of solid waste vehicles and traffic vehicles, I think these are work trucks like F-150s that are EcoBoost. They're not hybrid, and I'm not sure what the hybrid option is for a work utility truck with a utility bed and where we can store our equipment and do repairs and replacements. But that's definitely something I can ask the question of.
The reason I ask about this is because I was just at the city's Summit of the Americas, and Denver has a quite impressive fleet of electric work vehicles, a utilities vehicle that is all electric, and also a composting garbage truck, something that we don't have here, but so I think they are available out there somewhere. Commissioner Green?
If I may, in that, I don't know if you're discussing about testing an F-150 and getting into the, knowing that this year if you could get, first off, there's a wait list for these things. And so getting into that routine and knowing whether one at least is in the fleet that whether it works or not, this might be the right time to start putting that in there. And
Madam Chair, Commissioner Green, PJ Montano just brought up that we've made the attempt to buy these vehicles that are at least 1.5 years to 2 years out on ordering them and receiving them. So to your point, some of these vehicles that the reason they're on the list is because they've reached the end of their useful life. They've either had high mechanical problems, those kinds of things. So, I think getting into a cycle of getting 1 or 2 in the pipeline is definitely a good option before it becomes where we need to replace a vehicle because of it's at the end of its useful life and it's becoming a burden to maintain and repair it. But to get a couple in the pipeline so that we're always circulating through, especially when the lead time is so long.
is there a line item, pardon me, Madam Chair, is there a line item for deposits on that to sort of like get us in the line so we have a commitment to the manufacturers, or are we just sort of popping up when the local dealer says they have an extra one?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Green, typically when we buy fleet, they require a PO right from the beginning, so they're committed to we're committing to buying that vehicle. With 1.5 years to 2 years out, what we've seen is that they will not hold the price. So it's the price that they've given us at that time, and then we get an updated price along the way. Unfortunately, the price does not go down, and then we add money to that along the way. We have a couple trucks that we're in that situation right now, utility trucks where we've had to increase the PO because they've been on. We issued a PO about 1.5 years ago. So something that we can definitely do.
Great, thank you. I'd hope that the prices actually come down by the time we actually, a year and a half from now, because EVs are definitely coming down, so, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. I think that's, is there no more questions from the dais?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Thanks, Gabby. Thanks, Brian.
It's nice to see you, Gabby. We haven't seen you for a long time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Penny Ellis Green is not with us today, but she has provided us with some members of her senior team that can answer any questions that might arise relative to growth management. So starting with growth management, there were several items that fell off in terms of reductions for contractual initiatives that have been completed. That's the $180,000 reduction. It reflects the fact that there was not insignificant increase to their budget resulting from the implementation of the class and comp plan for non-union employees and the CBA implementation for bargaining unit members. Moving forward in terms of recurring initiatives and the like, there was a request for short-term rental compliance software. There's a note that we believe that a portion of that can actually be funded with lodger's tax, and in addition, there may be a reduction in cost for what I believe is generally compliance software going forward. One thing that I didn't highlight in the Public Works budget was a reduction, which is now showing up here in growth management for the Youth Corps, and that we believe is more appropriately housed in growth management. Moving forward, we had a few items that could have been broken out and titled differently. So these were efforts to reduce the budget, but after the budget was submitted, we also identified some items related to the proposed clean and lean ordinance that we'd want to be planning for should the board go forward with the adoption of that ordinance. So that's captured under training and safety supplies, looking at an increase of about $16,000. And again, there was a reduction proposed relative to an aspect of their budget, which is administrative equipment, machine, uniform rental. In terms of non-recurring expenditures, there were several items included in their budget that sum to almost $500,000 that, again, are project-specific. An effort to digitize SLDC records at $250,000, which would reduce the amount of hard copy records that we're attempting to manage. The final year of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies Juniper Thinning Research Project is again coming to an end and is non-recurring expenditure. Monies specifically, if needed, for resources to review STR applications during this next fiscal year were scored as non-recurring, as well as contractual resources for an SLDC review and analysis and potential amendments. Looking forward, we did work with the department to identify some potential reductions and alternative funding sources. But the thing I would highlight here, and again, it should have been titled differently, is an increase from what the department had originally requested, and these would be non-recurring requests for the nuisance ordinance in terms of potential professional services, as well as demolition and construction work. There might be an ongoing need for that, and again, whether it's scored as recurring or non-recurring, I think we, in our initial budget presentation, suggested that it be on the non-recurring side of things, because the exact costs are not known and are likely going to vary from year to year. But that was an effort to characterize and capture those resources. In terms of FTE requests and reclassifications, there were several requests from growth management. The first was the one that the chair alluded to earlier, and that was for an open space interpretive ranger. Our recommendation is to fund that so that we can provide a higher level of service to those who use our open space, but it would also help us to ensure that rules are being followed and that any potential risks are being identified so that they can be addressed. With regard to code enforcement in particular, and working with Ms. Ellis Green, we did identify a need for potential additional resources, as well as a higher classification of code enforcement officer to deal with some of the more technical work associated with the nuisance ordinance, as well as more complex cases generally. So the proposal is to reclassify an existing vacant code enforcement inspector to the position of code enforcement team leader, and then create a new FTE code enforcement supervisor. These are placeholder numbers. I don't know that we've gotten a report back from our independent consultant as to the actual range, but nonetheless, conceptually, that's how we propose to increase the capacity of our code enforcement group, as well as provide for a higher level position to tackle particularly complex cases, including those arising under the nuisance ordinance. Moving forward with these two items would also potentially provide the opportunity for promotional opportunities within the code enforcement section. In terms of the fixed asset request, I believe all of the items that were requested by the department were in fact recommended for funding. They're all in your packet material, and I would stand for any questions generally, as would the department, relative to the budget request for growth management. But that is the summary of its operating budget as well as its fixed asset request.
Thank you, Greg. I want to thank you for including code enforcement and coming up with a solution for a way to give them a ladder to advance and to be able to move up and have more resources. Because I do think as the county grows and we add in these additional responsibilities, we really need a robust code enforcement. I think that is really important. I'll go to the rest of commissioners. Commissioner Hamilton.
Yeah, back under reductions, you start out with, I want to know why we're not buying any more jumping mice. Okay, what I really want to know is why is just a little more information on the fire and forest management. It's kind of along the lines of Commissioner Hughes's earlier question. Is this just a reduction? Is there still funding in that area? I'm sorry,
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hamilton. Which line item were you
At the
focusing
very-
on in particular?
On the very first page for growth management, under reductions.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll ask the planning team to answer that question. Thank you.
Who at least gave me a smile, which was appreciated.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hamilton, thank you for your question. I know you may have joked about the meadow jumping mouse, but that one was originally planned for Los Potreros open space, and we decided to hold off on that because of the fledgling firefly population. We don't want to disturb the wet meadow anymore, even though that is a potential suitable habitat for that endangered species. And then as for the fire and forest management, that was originally requested in fiscal year 23. However, it was cut from that budget, and that was for the Ortiz Mountains open space. And we've been using the Youth Corps to manage the forest thinning project there.
Excellent. Both great to know. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton. Commissioner Green?
Thank you very much. 3 items that I'm wondering about. One, I'm wondering about the appropriateness of having the Clean and Lean $400,000 not be a public works. So once something is identified to be torn down, it seems like public works would be the skill set that would be the place to have somebody function as that, as sort of a project manager, whether it's to clean and do that. That seems, I mean, it's 400 in one budget versus 400 in another budget, but it just seems where to put it. Second one would be the SLDC update is long overdue, and I see $50,000, which is a nice start, but I'm wondering if that's appropriate and enough to do it comprehensively and to address all of the areas that has been overdue. So I'm wondering if that number should increase a little bit, and we could probably discuss that later. And then lastly, we spent 6.5 hours here on Monday talking about the annexation or the unannexation of Area 1B, and I think we should be preparing for that, or at least have it somewhere in our discussion for how to make sure that we can expedite providing the services and the planning to annex or reincorporate it into the county, or whatever we want to, whatever that function is. And so that seems to have a line item somewhere in growth management, and to make sure that we have the capacity to do that fast.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along the lines of the nuisance abatement ordinance, I added up the cost of the salaries and the costs for the cleanup, the professional services, and the demolition. I get $637,695. So is that our estimate now of the annual cost of that program? Because I know Commissioner Hamilton wanted a fiscal impact analysis, and I think that it looks to me like that is what we're estimating the annual cost. I just want to make sure that's correct.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hughes, certainly the FTE request for code enforcement, which is only partially related to the nuisance ordinance, that would be recurring. I think we don't have good data to project what the professional services and the demolition cost would be, nor what the offsetting revenue might be for the lien component of it. That's going to be variable depending upon the number of properties that actually get that far in the process, as well as the specific costs that are necessary in order to remedy the nuisance. I think it's our initial effort to provide funds to address that need, at least in the first year, but I think we would need more experience before we would be able to tell you this is what the recurring amount is, because it is going to be dependent on the number of properties that go through that process and the direction that the board gives us. So it's a long answer to your question, but I hope that I addressed it.
Okay, but I guess what I'm just making sure is, and I understand it's the first cut and it could be a lot more or a lot less, but this is our estimate for this coming year of our best guess.
That's fair.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Manager Schaefer, do you want to respond to Commissioner Green's ideas about the 50,000 for the SLDC update?
Oh, absolutely, Madam Chair and Commissioner Green. I took them down as things to follow up on. I don't know that I have, a particular response, but we'll look into whether those estimates are accurate. We'll work with planning to see what might be appropriate if we were going to undertake a fast planning effort for Area 1B, and then we'll discuss with Public Works whether the $400,000 component of that should be moved. So I understood those as items to be followed up on, and I didn't mean any disrespect by not responding to them.
Of course, thank you. And I didn't expect a quick answer here, especially with Ms. Ellis Green not in the room. So it's, and Madam Chair, thank you for following up on that. Just as a follow-up to the SLDC review, I've had a number of I don't know if they're constituents actually. I know that they are community and industry leaders in the land use, engineering, property development industry reach out to me to say it's long overdue and they have a lot of edits that they would like to be, have their input. So I think that there's an opportunity. I mean, we don't do this very often. It is a non-recurring thing, but it is long overdue. So I think there's an opportunity to clean up the SLDC. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. I think the last time we took on the SLDC was in 2018 or 19. We had, before your time here, but we had a number of workshops. We fixed a number of issues with the driveway and other items that were constantly causing us to have variances. And so that's one of the indications of whether the code is working or not, is how many variances we're having to undertake in the Planning Commission and ourselves and working on. But there are many things that need to be looked at in the SLDC, and so I do agree that it's time.
And that may be a great baseline to go from, is like, what did it take to do those workshops and all of those outreach efforts to make sure that we can, now it's less probably about the variances, but maybe it's some of the inconsistencies, and some people have figured out how to work through it, but it's not the intent of the SLDC being met with, whether it's clustering or other things like that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna, no, I need to go start packing.
Okay, somebody needs to mute themselves. I think there might be coming from the ethers. So thank you, commissioners. We'll move on and move forward. Greg?
Great, thank you, Growth Management. I appreciate you.
Yes, thank you, everybody from Growth Management for being here. Also, thank you to Public Works.
Moving forward, we have community development. There were a variety of changes from their fiscal year 2023 operating budget. I believe, let you ask any specific questions to Paul, but some of these are projects that are coming to an end, like the contractual services related to the affordable housing plan, the movement of the MS4 reporting contractual services from the budget of community development to the Public Works Department, as well as some items that were, again, funded, but moving forward, the determination from the department was that they were not needed for the upcoming fiscal year. In terms of new initiatives, they are surrounding lodgers tax, advertising campaigns, and then also an effort to partner and sponsor the City of Santa Fe Outdoor New Mexico Conference. That's inappropriate labeled as recurring. That should be moved to non-recurring. That is a one-time event in the next fiscal year, and also an increase related to the housing utilities. In terms of efforts with the department to identify alternative funding sources and also look at areas in which a budget could be reduced without negatively impacting services, there is an effort to shift the marketing coordinator position from the general fund to the lodgers tax, which we're recommending doing. And then there's also an effort to purchase the Administrative Santa Fe platform in that cost center using ARPA funds rather than general funds. There are a variety of non-recurring requests that are detailed and broken out. Many of them relate to the film office, as well as some software expenses that may be coming to an end. There's been $500,000 that has been carried over for a few fiscal years for a potential solar energy efficiency and electrification loan fund. I believe that the request and recommendation from the department is that the use of those monies be broadened, and that be included as part of the affordable housing assistance programs that are being proposed for funding in the amount of $617,000 in the next fiscal year. In turn,
I just want to mention for one moment, it's possible. There's been a lot of talk about the Green Bank and the Climate Investment Fund, and possibly that $500,000 could be something that could be used in that category, something that the coalition is working on. We worked on it during the legislative session. So the Climate Investment Fund would be able to tap into money from the Green Bank that is in the IRA. It's in one of the many federal funds, and if we had a climate investment fund, we could tap into some of those federal funds, because you have to have a green bank or a formal situation to draw down those funds from the IRA. I believe it's in the IRA. And I know that this board has in the past supported the Green Bank, but the Climate Investment Fund is kind of the same thing as the Green Bank. So I'm just bringing that up as a possibility.
thank you, Madam Chair. And the funds, to be clear, whether they are utilized for those initiatives or part of the affordable housing assistance programs, they're included in the budget recommendation as a non-recurring item. Moving forward to FTE request, there were two that were put forward this cycle. We're not recommending them at this time, though, again, they could be revisited either at mid-year, depending upon how much money is needed to update the class and comp plan, or as part of the next fiscal year. The one was an energy officer. We are recommending that we invest in software that would enable us to better track our energy usage and utility bills. Collecting that data would be a first step to really refining and defining what this officer could do for the county. But again, it's an effort to balance taking care of our existing workforce and initiatives before expanding further. The energy compliance officer, if that were to be funded, that would be moved to the Public Works Department. It too could be revisited as part of the mid-year process or next fiscal year. I do want to specifically note that it's something that Brian and I have been talking about as a potential need, and I think as it stands right now, it's fair for me to say that Brian supports investing resources in our existing positions, and that that will enable us to get a better sense of what our true bandwidth is. But it is quite possible, and certainly within the realm of the possible, that as we move forward and as our vacancies come down, we would still find ourselves in a position of thinking that this would be a needed position as we increase our environmental compliance efforts in the Public Works Department. But at least for the first fiscal year, again, the intent is to try and deal with that through existing resources that are hopefully expanding as we're able to reduce our vacancies. The actual fixed asset request were relatively minor. We did should have updated the column for the IT recommendation, but we did recommend the housing scan project to help with better digitization of some of our affordable housing documentation, which can be voluminous. So again, an effort to be more efficient with our existing resources. I touched briefly relative to the utilities tracking and energy analysis software. And then finally, there were several requests from our Housing Authority division. And I or Paul and his team would be pleased to answer any questions.
Commissioner Green?
Thank you again, Greg. So 2 film questions and 1 sustainability question. So the first 2 film questions. Jen, thank you for inviting me yesterday to the Netflix sustainability thing. So it's like this great synergy there between sustainability and the film industry. So one is potential to, I don't know if it's in the budget to have a line item for collaborating on the next phase of the, it was a city initiative, but since it's a city-county shared office of the mayor's film initiative, strategic action plan. And so I think we discussed it, so I just want to make sure that it is actually in there, and I think it was somewhere between $10,000 or $20,000, something like that, and that would be the first one.
I saw that in there.
Did you see it? Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
And that was specifically for that line item. Okay, great.
It's in there, 15.
And then also in the Natives Film Support area, having started a collaboration between now all five of our Native American tribes in Santa Fe County are interested in collaborating, and so if we could have some support, whether it's facilitation or development. Yes, you've got an answer, so thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner, we do have it in there at 10.
That's wonderful. Great, thank you. And then lastly, it's sort of like somewhere between sustainability and public works. There seems to be a lot of money in federal grant writing right now and opportunities to do that. And so I don't know if it's a grant writer, a project manager, or somebody that is a specialist in, and this is maybe taking 2 steps back to public works, but it's somebody that's a specialist in sustainability being in the budget for public works to go after money and then really be the, we're going to put solar all over the place. We're going to put EV chargers. We're going to go get this money, just to make sure that we're working across the silos. And great.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Commissioner, yes, we are looking at, and primarily looking at North Central New Mexico to provide some of that grant writing support and grant research support. Currently, we're working on the EV charger grant that I think Commissioner Hanson was maybe thinking about earlier as well. So we are pursuing that, and we're doing more research as to what other options are out there, and we're hoping to draw on North Central's capabilities and resources to help us in doing that. And of course, we would want to work outside of silos and be collaborative across with, all departments. It could be, public safety, public works, anyone that's involved.
Thank you. I love that North Central has created a resource for us, and I'm wondering if maybe there should be some contribution to North Central to allow their expertise to be, so we could give them a little bit of extra money, so we don't feel like we're overtaxing them with Santa Fe County, because there's 7 counties that they have to spread their. So I'm wondering if that's something to reimburse them, or if there's some way to say, hey, give us more priority because we're giving you more juice. I'm just spitballing there, but I know we're going to be depending on them a lot, and so I don't want them to turn us down because we've overused them.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, we are paying dues right now for that, and we could look into other options, and I can reach out to Monica and see if there's any other need.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes, I have a question when you want to get to me.
Okay, Jacqueline Beam and I attended the city's Summit of the Americas, and I believe that when we're there, IGLE has been awarded a designation to create more sustainability and a way to help our sustainability department. So if there's some way we can help Jacqueline apply for this this grant, this funding, this support that IGLE is willing to do with the competition. So it would take some time for our staff, but the time is short. But there's 12 cities in America, in the U.S., and 12 cities in South America and the Caribbean that are going to be awarded this funding or support. It's really more support, and I'm just advocating for that because we are a partner with IGLE already, and we use them, and they did encourage Jacqueline to apply. Because we are a small county, we would be in a unique situation. I hope I explained that properly, Jacqueline.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, if you want to speak to it, I think we can work with sustainability and explore those options.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I just wanted to state also that we are in the final draft of the CAP, and it does include a climate interdepartmental panel that we would work with in order to reduce the siloing that we run into often. And so that will be a major part of the CAP. And we absolutely will apply for the opportunity that you mentioned, Chair.
Thank you. It was a very impressive conference that the U.S. State Department put on that Jacqueline and I were able to attend. Commissioner Hamilton. Yeah, I know. Okay. Okay, Commissioner Hughes, you're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the energy officer and the environmental compliance officer. What was envisioned for those positions, especially environmental compliance? I mean, I have my idea, but I want to see what you all were thinking for that function, whether it's in public works or sustainability. What's the function?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, the environmental compliance officer was really focused on looking at compliance with various regulatory conditions and processes, primarily out of MS4 requirements, but it could also be for water quality, also air quality, et cetera. And I think there is a need for the county, but as Greg explained, I think we're going to try and explore the existing resources and enhancing the existing resources at Public Works and revisit that request at either mid-year or at fiscal year 25. So that was the environmental compliance. The energy officer was more of helping us monitor our energy consumption and also our potential for rebates and making sure that we're submitting those things on time and receiving them, and also enhancing our energy efficiencies across the county facilities.
And why are we putting off the energy officer then? It says putting it off till FY25. Why would we? Isn't that something we need now?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I think the concept is that we are also applying and receiving in our fixed asset request for the utility tracking and energy monitoring software, and we want to implement that and receive the data and determine either at mid-year or the FY25 budget process whether that request is still needed and at what level.
Okay, I understand. My other comment is just going back to the $500,000 for solar panel help, rolling that into the Affordable Housing Fund. I think that makes sense if we keep the project in-house, but I'm, along with Commissioner Hanson, I'm still interested in possibly combining efforts with the Coalition of Sustainable Communities and leveraging a ton of federal money for the state and also for our county for that. And I think if we do that, we might want to not rob the whole $500,000 out of the affordable housing program, because I think that would maybe not leave enough for other affordable housing programs. So I think, to the extent that we have some flexibility in the non-recurring funds when we look at the budget, we might want to just think about keeping those separate so that we're not taking all of our affordable housing money and putting it just toward solar programs, because I know there are a lot of other needs. And that's more of just a comment. And I think we need to find out what the Coalition of Sustainable Communities plan really is. I mean, it was very unfortunate that the state did not set up the Green Financing Fund. And so now, we're sort of left with the possibility of just a coalition of, communities that represents about half the state population doing it, but it's a lot more complicated. And so we'll have to see whether that, has any real potential to fly. But I would certainly, if it does, then I would certainly want to support that. And it would sort of take off of our hands having to do some of that work internally, and then we could concentrate on some of the other parts of affordable housing. And I think also in some of the earlier material, we talked about actually putting a lot more money into an affordable housing trust fund. So I think that's something we also still need to consider is, how much do we want to put into an affordable housing trust fund on an ongoing basis? And maybe $617,000 is the right amount for the first year, but I would think that would increase steadily over the years. And there wasn't really a question in there unless someone wants to comment, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I just want to comment on the 500. So it would not be envisioned at this point as solely solarization. It would, our ability to use it would be enhanced by adding it into the Affordable Housing Fund, because then we can avoid anti-donation challenges, and it would be envisioned as maybe a revolving fund. That program is dependent on the Affordable Housing Plan and ordinance being adopted, and then we can stand it up, and at that point we can be looking at other funding options and also options for this 500. But we'll keep that in mind and as we move forward.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that if we go in with the Coalition of Sustainable Communities, then, they'll sort of be two separate programs, it would seem to me. And not that, but we will still need to learn if that's even viable. But I understand what you're saying too. And of course, one of the problems when we first looked at the Coalition of Sustainable Communities, some of the proposed uses for the county funds looked like they would have violated the anti-donation clause. So that's something we have to work through as well. And I'll stop talking now because my voice is about to give out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Hamilton?
Thank you. Well, actually, so Commissioner Hughes commented on two of the three things. My third one is a question. But it seems unfortunate to me. I have the concern about the $500,000. I understand completely the logic in using it, putting it someplace where we can actually use it if there have been roadblocks to using that. But given all the programs that sometimes require matches that you can leverage money for doing solar, especially on low income or affordable housing, it bothers me a little to lose that option. But if that money's been sitting there since we got put in before COVID or something, that's not very good either. So that just builds on the other comments. The Commissioner Hughes also commented on like the environmental compliance officer. I get that too, but I want to add that like Public Works desperately needs more people, right? We need to build that up. But having more people in project management isn't going to help environmental compliance, which we've always needed. So I want to make sure that is given a good review, because maybe if it's postponed a year or maybe only half a year, but it seems like a position we need. I know we need all the other positions. And my third was questions again under the reductions. The MS4 reporting, it specifies that it was moved to Public Works. But then there's the domestic well monitoring and utilities tracking data analysis, especially the well monitoring. Was that also moved to Public Works, or is it just taken out?
Madam Chair, I defer to Greg and Yvonne, but I believe the well monitoring is transferring to Public Works.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless they have more comments to my comments.
I do also believe that the domestic well monitoring is going to be moved to Public Works.
Yeah, that's totally logical. I just wanted to
Commissioner Green?
double check.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two more things. One out of ignorance, I'm not sure where this lands, whether it's sustainability, Public Works, or community development, but I get a lot of requests from my district for assistance with the acequias. Some of it is Public Works, obviously, maintenance and helping with culverts and things like that. Some of it is also a lot of the acequias up in the north have issues with receiving money from the state, but they need technical assistance for keeping their books in order and having some legal guidance. And I'm wondering if there's a place for this in community development as a sort of an ombudsman for the acequias to come to the county and say, help us stay compliant. They get money from the state, $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, but it ends up being unable to be spent, and because they have some non-compliance issues. So that's question number one. And then this other one was, we seem to have gotten some good traction about the concept of strategic housing, and I'm wondering if there is a space for the strategic housing initiative that would allow for us to develop housing for our key workforce, our civic first responders, police, fire, medical, and education workforce. So I'm wondering if that has a space in the budget at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. So I want to ask a question on the same issue. With the acequias, don't they, I think they're their own separate government, so there might be some issues there. But I believe that Senator Worth and Representative Herrera passed this bill about being a water utility, mutual domestics, and different organizations being able to join forces and use some of that fund, and I don't know if that covers Ezekias or not, but that would be, I think, a good place for Ezekias to reach out to that, because that was set up by Senator Worth as a way to help these smaller entities, and especially mutual domestics. But I don't know if Ezekias were included in that, but they could have been.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. I wonder about that. But I know that I think with Representative Romero last year, they identified like well over $500,000 worth of frozen funds that Ezekias weren't able to. They had it pledged by the state, but unable to access because they didn't have a legal brain or a technical assistance ombudsman that could help them get that. And that's money that goes to our district, our county potentially, but gets frozen. And, you know.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Green, they wouldn't work through the
Ezeki
Ezeki
Association. The Ezeki Association was in the room, and they were pointing fingers saying that that's not there. The capability was not there to sort of, at least the capacity was not there to help so many of them. And it seems to be that they all have similar problems. You know, our bylaws are out of date, or our books are not, you know. So it's a technical assistance sort of training and how to sort of workshop, but who knows? It's just throwing it out there to see if we can help.
I think, personally, I think that's something Northern Rio Grande National Heritage Area could work to help facilitate.
Thank you for volunteering that. Thank you.
Not volunteering, I'm only saying maybe.
Maybe. Okay, thank you.
I would never volunteer Eric for anything. He's got a full plate.
Housing, if you can address that.
Yeah, Madam Chair. So the Ezekias, I know in the past, we've had some activities with Public Works providing some assistance, and also planning through the Ezeki Association, or together with the association, has also provided some assistance. I think it's largely a capacity question and for some of the smaller systems, but we do not have anything in this current year budget for that. And as far as strategic housing, we haven't included anything because we're still kind of, as you know, in the kind of preliminary stages of getting things together. We can have that discussion with the manager's office offline and have a further exploration of it before the next meetings.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that.
Thank you. Shall we move on?
That was the last one for today.
Oh, thank you. So thank you, everyone from Community Development. I want to mention one thing that both Commissioner Bustamante and I will be attending the outdoor recreation conference kickoff on Tuesday. It would be helpful if we were informed about it ahead of time that we are sponsoring it. I don't know who chose that, so it would be good for all of us to get information like that. Because when the executive director, Jeff Steinborn, called me, I wasn't exactly familiar, and I apologize if I missed it somewhere in a meeting. But I know Commissioner Bustamante and I will be attending.
Yeah.
At the convention center.
It's here?
Yes.
Oh.
So
When?
Madam, yeah, excuse me. So, Madam Chair, yes, we were just kind of informed of that within the last month, and because it's in our budget, we weren't certain that we would be sponsoring it exactly, so it's kind of dependent on this process of allocating the funding, but we do intend to attend that kickoff, and I'm sorry if we didn't get the note or the knowledge out there earlier. I take responsibility for that.
Thank you, Paul.
No disrespect intended.
I covered very well.
Okay. And I just want to say, before we leave, I just want to say thank you to all of the team members on community development. They've worked really hard on this budget, and also reviewing it and seeing where we can take some cuts. And it's a great group we have, and I really want to say thank you, and they deserve a lot of respect for the hard work they're putting in.
Yes, I want to thank all of them at Community Development. I mean, this is your second full year, or first full year, and I think it's the second full year. Yeah, okay. And it's good to see all of you in the room. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all.
And thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners, and I too just want to end on that note of thanking all of the departments for their hard work, both with regard to their initial submissions, but then working with us over the last several weeks to try and, again, make sure that we were doing what we could to target investment in our ongoing efforts for increasing the salaries of our existing workforce. So I thank everyone for that. And of course, want to particularly thank Yvonne Herrera for her yeoman's work on the budget. I can't ever say enough thank you to her, given the staffing issues that she has as well. So thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne. Also, I know we are all grateful to the hard work you put in on the budget. It's sometimes it looks like it's behind the scenes, but it's actually one of the most important things that we have happening, and we're grateful to the Finance Committee and to the Finance Department and to you for your hard work.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you, appreciate it, but I also need to thank Manager Schaefer.
That's okay, we want to see him in high heels too.
I had the conversation with myself earlier, and I said the same thing. I told myself, don't do it, and I still did it, and as well as the deputy county managers, because without them and the finance staff, we wouldn't be here right now. And all the departments, they did a really good job of preparing their budget with a very short notice, and being really gracious in looking at their budgets again to try to find additional funding that we could use in other areas.
Yes, thank you for that, Yvonne. I want to recognize Leandro and Elias and Greg for all your hard work. This is not an easy process, and it's a lot of work, and we all recognize that. So thank you. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Bustamante.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Hamilton. All in favor say aye.
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 See you all on Friday.